John Calambokidis is a senior research biologist at Cascadia Research Collective, which is a nonprofit that he co-founded in 1979, based in Olympia, Washington. Since the 1980s, I think I remember him from way back then, he studied large whales in the eastern North Pacific, mostly working from a small inflatable boats out of every harbor from Santa Barbara down to San Diego and boat launching along the West Coast. Super interested in sound and how sound affects cetaceans and in also vessel strikes on how whales are impacted by boat strikes and trying to do everything can be done to mitigate that. And he's very interested in finding out what the current populations of whales are, does a lot of photo ID, so many things he's done. Just a couple of things I could attest to that I've seen. One was that he was studying some fin whales off the Los Angeles harbor. We had quite a few fin whales and heard about blue whales will, during courtship, chase each other, males chasing after a female. And when we were out there, when John was out there, I was out in a separate boat, and we saw two fin whales chasing another fin whale and went alongside them at a distance, and they were going 24 miles per hour and then pulled off, and they kept that speed up for about 45 minutes, chasing around like crazy. And another quick one is John named one of our local sperm whales Mango, which is pretty famous because he was eating mango at the time he saw him, and since then another sperm whale is Papaya. So they started the naming these whales after fruit. But he had this was a whale that he'd most often seen in Southern California and dates way back to the 1990s, and put a tag on that whale in the Channel Islands. And I believe that tag lasted till almost the Galapagos as that whale headed south. So just invaluable research all across cetaceans, and super excited to hear what he has to say tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. And really great to be able to talk to all of you tonight. We did identify kind of a broad set of topics, which was sort of to cover updates on some of the research we've been doing on blue humpback and gray whales. And those are the three primary species I do study, but we are interested in quite a few others. And I'll be touching on, looking at some of the participants here. I know some of you have heard me talk before. I'll be updating some of the numbers from the work we do and talking a little bit about some of the new research we're doing as well. All three of these species are large whale species that occur along the West Coast. I'm based up here in Olympia, Washington, but I do a lot of work off California, and we sort of treat the U.S. West Coast as our area. And they all have a little bit different stories, and we'll cover just some of the interesting things that I think would be good to talk about. The research that Cascadia and some of our collaborators are involved with, I view it as a combination of trying to take certain techniques like photo identification, which is a tried and true method that's been used for a long time, and try to extend those data sets out. The longer we use that technique, the more valuable it becomes and the more insightful it becomes, as well as mixing in some of the new tools that become available. And we'll chat just a little bit about those from ways we can use new tags to study whales underwater or drone-based observations. But the photo ID technique is one we've used going back to the mid-1980s. And in this slide, try to sort of summarize three kind of categories of ways we use that photo ID information that you'll be seeing some examples of. One is we use those identifications to estimate abundance. And unlike some species like killer whales, where that estimate comes just straight from the photo IDs and the number of different individuals, some of these populations are large enough and we're only sampling a portion of the population. So we use mark recapture statistics with the photo ID to extrapolate populations, and we'll be seeing some of the updates from that. We also use it, of course, to track migrations of animals across distances, where they move between. And a lot of this involves collaboration with other researchers. And that's something that's really been facilitated by, Ted Cheeseman and Happy Whale, that we played a role in helping to start on the West Coast putting in our data originally into it and making it publicly accessible, so that the information as people added it to be able to see the matches to our whales. Um, but we also use it to track individual animals and things like survival. And this has played a role in tracking things like survival of different individuals that have become entangled, for example. And just some basic statistics here in the bottom left corner, when we started some of these catalogs with humpback, blue whales, and gray whales, how many unique individuals are currently in our catalog, which is focused on the US West Coast, and then how many encounters have been documented in that zone. So you can see we're in the thousands of individuals and tens of thousands of encounters. And that number for humpback whales has gone up dramatically since 2015 and the start of Happy Whale and the degree to which that promoted citizen science participation. Now, our own surveys, we mostly do in these small boats. We've had, I don't know, I think it's about 10 boats over the years. These are two of our current three rigid hull inflatables that we use up and down the coast. They're all Hurricanes and of different sizes. This upper one is based in Monterey Bay. This one's based in the Northwest, and we have a third one that's intermediate in size to these two that we tow up and down the coast. And our coverage, we try to cover almost all the areas along the coast. So I'll show you the most recent years in a second, but I picked one of our best years, 2018. And these little squiggly lines you see in this panel here where my cursor is, those are the tracks of our small boat efforts just in that 1 year in 2018, where we went out and did surveys looking for whales. And you can see we've tried to cover all of the coast. Some areas are covered a little better than others, but we do try to go out of as many harbors as we can and cover as much of the coast as we can. And for a species like humpback whales, you can see these are the sightings, again, just from 2018. And you can see the humpback whales were distributed all along the coast. And we also tend to collect things like biopsy samples. And 2018 was a year we made a major effort to collect biopsy samples to look at things like population structure from genetics. And you can see our sampling came from all of the coast in 2018. Well, let's look at the last 3 years to be a little more accurate and timing. And now this figure is broken up into a upper, kind of Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and then the Central and Southern California. But the same principle, these squiggly lines show our effort in 2022, 23, and 2024. And again, we tend to get these sightings. These show humpback and blue whale sightings. Blue whales appropriately in blue and humpback whales in red from those years and how they're distributed. Now that sighting information, it'll plug into a couple of things that I'll touch on. But first, I mentioned the photo ID we use in these mark recapture. And I've shown this figure probably for 20 years, but I keep adding on more years to the right. So it might be a familiar figure, but these are humpback whale abundance estimates using two different abundance mark recapture estimate methods. It also shows a 7.5% growth curve. And I've also superimposed the estimates from Southwest Fisheries Science Center's line transect surveys. And you can see all of these, show this dramatic increase in humpback whale abundance. And our most recent abundance estimates on the model we trust the most now through 2024, and this hasn't been published anywhere yet, now for the first time for California and Oregon exceeds 7,000 humpback whales. And to me, that's a little bit flabbergasting because when I started studying humpback whales over here in the 80s, our initial estimates were 500. So we've seen, over a tenfold increase in humpback whale abundance, during this period we've studied these animals. And, 7.5% per year adds up over that many years. And so this is a remarkable and positive story. I'll put it a little bit in context, though. Well, let me mention one other estimate. This is the estimate. That previous slide was California and Oregon. These are our updated estimates for Washington and southern British Columbia, an area we define as a separate feeding area because we actually have very little interchange of humpback whales between those that feed off Washington and southern British Columbia and those that feed off California, Oregon. So we actually estimate those separately. But there is a little bit of overlap. But like those off California, Oregon, those off Washington, southern BC have also been showing this increase. And again, I show a 7.5% growth rate. And you can see our upper model here, which is the one that accounts for, I don't want to use heterogeneity of capture probability is the term, but basically it accounts for the fact some whales are more likely to be ID'd than others and corrects for that bias. And that's so we think that's our least biased estimate is this one shown in black with the black squares. So that's another over 2,000 animals along the US West Coast to that estimate of 7,000. Now that sounds like it should be all a very rosy picture for humpback whales in the North Pacific. And at least in kind of the research, going through the mid 2000s, it was looking pretty rosy for humpbacks in many areas. But it looks like that this increase that we've had on the West Coast is not occurring in other areas. And this is from a paper we were a part of, but that Ted Cheeseman was the senior author, but had lots of co-authors on it from other parts of the North Pacific, actually reveal that humpback whale abundance overall, which is, has not been increasing. And if you look at, for example, the Hawaii breeding area here in red, that's actually decreased in the last 10 years, even while those going to Mexico has increased. And the overall humpback whale population that you see here on average showed this decrease, starting in right around the mid 2010s. So, a lot of that was driven by, changes in humpback whale abundance, in different areas. And this is now taking the data from Ted's model and adding in other data. And this is from now an IWC model that also tried to plot and estimate the change in overall North Pacific whale abundance. And again, you can see that peak around 2014, 15, followed by a decrease and maybe initial signs of a recovery. And so what does that mean? And over on the left here, these are plots for different feeding areas. And so let's focus on the left here. And that California, Oregon, based heavily on our mark recapture data, is shown here in the bottom right, showing that increase. And what you'll see is that certain other areas like Southeast Alaska and Northern BC and other parts of Alaska have shown a much more precipitous decline, even while our population was increasing off the US West Coast. And so that translated over here on the right, these are different winter breeding areas, and taking that IWC model that works with the data from Ted Cheeseman's paper and others and tries to combine it, you'll see that's what resulted in these declines in Hawaii that you saw to some degree in portions of Mexico, the offshore islands, even though the Mexico population overall looked like it was increasing. Now we thought, well, with those sorts of changes and the occurrence of them, maybe that suggests humpback whales that normally feed off Southeast Alaska, maybe they've shifted to the US West Coast. Big increase there, big decrease up there. And even though in our data and collaborating with some of the researchers in Southeast Alaska, we were seeing some indication that in those mid 2010s, there was a slight increase in the proportion of humpback whales that seen on the US West Coast that had also been seen in Alaska. If you look at the scale on the left here, that was still under 2%. So the almost more remarkable story is even as these humpback whales were declining in Southeast Alaska and increasing on the US West Coast, we actually saw very, very little switch of humpback whales from Alaskan feeding areas to the US West Coast. And it's that rather remarkable. They've kind of continued to show that loyalty to areas. Uh, and we're going to see this kind of come up in a couple of other areas, but you might say, well, what happened in the mid 2010s that might explain this decline in other parts of the North Pacific? And that was the period of the marine heat wave, sometimes more colloquially known as the blob, occurred. And it looks like that had a major impact on prey of humpback whales in other areas like Alaska that affected their population in a big way, but not our populations off the US West Coast. Now, I mentioned that we gather these sighting data from our surveys, and we do try to use the sighting data itself in a few ways. And last year, we did publish an update of assigning biologically important areas for a number of species of cetaceans along the US West Coast. And this updated a paper we had done in 2015 looking at these biologically important areas. And we wanted to update it because there was much more data. We wanted to use a much more quantitative approach than we'd used before. So we were able to do that. This is from our previous paper back in 2015. So now with our new paper, we've combined data from a number of sources, now bringing in tagging data, especially some of the tagging data from Oregon State University and other researchers, some of the sighting data from the Southwest Fisheries Science Center cruises, and then all of our small boat surveys that I had shown you earlier. And we combine all three of those together now on this latest to assign these biologically important areas. And we've done that for humpback whales. A number of areas of the Southern California Bight come out, as these biologically important areas based on the combination of these data sets, as well as for blue whales. And in this slide, it's just showing you we use these different data sets to then combine and set different priority areas based on each data set. And then we use the overlap among them to set these biologically important areas. Now, one of the things we've been engaged in intensely in the last 5 years has been surveys to try to inform ways to reduce entanglement risk of humpback whales in particular, as well as other species. And a number of other groups and people are involved in this. I've listed some of them here. It's a project we've done with the Marine Mammal Center in California. It was funded by the Ocean Protection Council of California through the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. And part of the reason for that was that also starting in 2015 and partially linked to that marine heat wave, there was a big jump in number of whale entanglements. This figure here, taken from NOAA's updated website, shows the number of confirmed large whale entanglements along the US West Coast. And you can see it generally was under 10 animals until about the mid-2010s and made this big jump in 2015. And that was, again, during the period of marine heat wave. We think there was a role that the marine heat wave at least seemed to concentrate humpback whales a little bit closer to shore that overlapped more with some of the fishing operations. And that caused this spike in number of entanglements. Also going on, from our population estimates that there is just increased number of humpback whales. So even if you add the same fishing effort and the same level of overlap, if you have a growing humpback population, there are probably going to be more entanglements because of that. So anyway, there's probably an upward trend that's affected by the overall population. We see this big spike in the mid-2010s that was related to this compression of animals more into coastal areas near where fishing operations occurred. And then I actually take this as encouraging, partly due to a legal suit against the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They've instituted, working with fishermen and different fishermen working groups, a much more restrictive policy, both about when they open and close the Dungeness crab fishery, which is one of the main fisheries implicated in these entanglements where the gear is able to be identified. And so some of those proactive measures taken by fishing groups working with CDFNW and restrictions to the fishery, I think have caused this more positive, slightly downward trend in number of entanglements, despite the fact that humpback whales have continued to increase. I was going quick over this, but these blue bars basically show the number of humpback whales, and you can see that spike in number of large whale entanglements was largely driven by humpback whales, and that remains the main species involved. But there are blue whales as well as gray whales, and sometimes unidentified other whales that are also involved in these entanglements. And while they occur up and down the coast, there is a concentration of these entanglement reports that occur in the in a couple of areas. For one, Monterey Bay, and another area you see quite a few reports is here in the Southern California Bight. And we think that's primarily because of those are the areas where there's frequent whale watching activities and more knowledgeable people out on the water reporting those entanglements. So we think these entanglements are almost equally common up and down the coast, but the concentrations may more reflect where we're getting that good reporting. It may be that only 5 to 10% of the entanglements are actually getting reported, because we see lots of humpback whales with scars on their bodies from having survived entanglements. There are many different indications and lines of evidence that tell us that the entanglement reports are only a fraction of the true number. One of the reasons that has prompted us, or this increase in entanglements has prompted us to start something called the Partnership for West Coast Whale Entanglement Action. So this is a new program we started last year, launched in May of 2024 at Cascadia. We're partnering with groups up and down the West Coast, as well as some of the state and federal agencies, to try to create a more coordinated and effective both response to entanglement, but also to conduct entanglement-related research. This Partnership for West Coast Whale Entanglement Action is headed at Cascadia by Doug Sandilands and Jen Tackaberry, who came back working with us last year. And so I'm excited about this development, and I think it's going to improve some of the response. Jen and Doug are in Monterey Bay right now, doing work there for the next month. One of the areas we've received some support for is to especially try to bolster and help with some of the responses in areas like the Santa Barbara Channel, where you have people like Dave Beezer and others who have been active. But by adding a little more coordination and training, we hope to be able to improve responses in some of those areas where we have those reports, like Southern California and Monterey Bay. One of the other things we've been doing as a part of this response to these increased entanglements is conduct surveys immediately before when the Dungeness crab fishery is supposed to open in California. And that helps inform, are whales still around, and are the habitats they're using overlapping with the area of the fishery? The fishery is primarily a shallower water fishery, primarily waters under 100 meters deep. And humpback whales and blue whales are often feeding more out in waters closer to the shelf edge in 200 meters, but sometimes they come in much shallower waters and overlap to a greater degree. The Dungeness crab commercial fishery usually opens in November and December, depending on area. And these surveys, along with aerial surveys and other sources of information, including sightings from Whale Watch, like the Monterey Bay Whale Watch, have helped inform whether to delay the opening of the Dungeness crab fishery. And in each of the last, I think, 4 years, that opening of the Dungeness crab fishery has been delayed by a month or more in response to this information showing whales were still around in high densities. And so I think that's been one of the ways in which those entanglement reports have come down, partly because the fishery is now opening a little later and after most of the whales have left, or in periods where the whales are more using waters that don't overlap with the fishery. These are the sort of results we end up sharing with CDF&W and the Dungeness Crab Working Group to show them, here's the survey we did. In this case, this was from, early November 2024, as they were evaluating whether to delay the opening of the Dungeness crab fishery, showing these concentrations of humpback whales, in this case, often in shallower waters where the crab fishery would often operate. I made reference to the fact that scarring on humpback whales has been useful in assessing degree of entanglement risk. And there have been a number of studies underway. There's one publication in press right now that's focused a little more on Oregon on this. And what these studies have been particularly useful for is showing that these incidents and risk of entanglement that humpback whales face, they face all along the coast. So even though you have these higher entanglement reports in Monterey Bay or Southern California, the percent of animals showing some level of entanglement scarring was relatively similar all along the coast, showing they faced a similar risk up and down the coast, even where the reports were not as frequent. One of the key questions to inform that opening of the fishery that we've been excited about is, there's been now this growing database using the photo ID that has captured humpback whales, both late in the season on the feeding ground, so right before they leave on their migration, and then down on the breeding grounds just as they arrive. And what we started to do was compile some of these cases where the migration speed from these consecutive sightings suggested that we had largely caught the migration. The animal had been identified shortly before it left and resighted just after it arrived on the breeding ground. And there ended up being, using a cutoff speed of 2.5 kilometers per hour. And this is analysis that Jen Tackerberry's been working with. We had over 200 cases for southbound migrating humpback whales and 80 cases of northbound migrating, where we could assign this kind of earliest and latest period they migrated. And the surprise was how varied it was. Even these, data sets that were selecting animals that we had largely caught the migration period for, some were leaving as early as September and as late as February. So a pretty broad period when they were leaving for the migration routes. And similarly on the northbound migration, some were, arriving, you could look at kind of arrival times and would see quite a bit, some kind of arriving from a breeding ground as early as December and as late as April. And what that really showed was a lot of variability between animals, a lot of differences between the areas they were migrating to, and it just kind of showed some variation. So we're working on this as an analysis that we think will also help inform that overlap with the Dungeness crab fishery. Okay, let me shift gears a little bit and talk about blue whales for a second, and then I'll talk about gray whales, and then we'll have a couple of other pieces. With blue whales, I'll be a little briefer. This is a photo from actually off LA. We've been studying blue whales for as long as we've been studying humpbacks, since the mid 1980s. And some of the data that we have from photo identification of blue whales, again, spans the kind of US West Coast, and to some degree covers some of the other parts of their range. You can actually see some of the identifications in areas going further south, either contributed from opportunistic sources or from our surveys along the West Coast. We're really excited that we have a PhD student, Georgie Whittam, that's focused on analysis of the blue whale data. She has a publication that's we're just waiting to hear a decision on now, that's an updated model of how we estimate blue whale abundance. And so really excited about some of the work that she's doing. Our blue whale abundance estimates have been a bit of a puzzle for us, because unlike with humpback whales, Here you see our mark recapture estimate, in this case in squares, showing a fairly stable to slightly increasing blue whale abundance, though nothing like the increase we've seen in humpback whales. And then in these dash lines, you see the estimates that have come from the Southwest Fisheries Science Center line transect estimates. And what's puzzling here is that it's showing the exact opposite trend of our photo ID data. So it's created a bit of a mystery for us. And we really want to get this right. On the one hand, blue whales might be doing okay and have shown a great recovery, and their numbers at over 2,000 would be good. But when you look at this line transect data, it's suggesting a more dramatic decline of blue whales. Now, those two methods measure two very different things. The mark recapture tries to estimate the overall abundance of blue whales that visit the US West Coast, whereas the line transect estimate is estimating density of blue whales during the summer and fall. And so it would be trying to do a snapshot of how many blue whales are using the US West Coast at a moment in time. So we might expect them to disagree since they're measuring different things, but it's still very surprising they show different trends. So we're puzzled by that. And that's one of the things kind of Georgie's work is going to try to zero in on a little more, is to help resolve that mystery. I'll skip over this. This is sort of a reiteration of the same thing. I do want to talk a little bit about tagging and the tag deployments we've done, because we have deployed hundreds of different kinds of tags on these three species. I think we're up to 800 or 900 tag deployments, and mostly they've been these suction cup attached, what we call archival tags, meaning they're tags that you put on temporarily on the whale. The data is recorded on the tag, and then you have to get it back. The advantage of that is you can get these incredibly rich data streams, video data, detailed data, taking data points, 100 times a second if you want, for accelerometry, pressure and depth, magnetometry. You can get very detailed information. You can have an onboard GPS to get GPS quality positions. The downside is you need to recover the tag. So it has to have flotation, it has to come off the tag, and you have to find it and recover it. And we use a combination of a VHF transmitter and a satellite transmitter to recover the tag. We've also been experimenting with, these suction cup deployments typically last only hours, and sometimes, up to a day or two. I think we do have a record deployment that's gone 3 or 4 days, but that's extremely unusual. But some of this data gets extremely valuable. So especially with blue whales, we've been deploying some of these same types of tags, except attaching them with small darts that hook into the blubber layer. And they still fall out. The entire tag comes off. And we've been able to study and see you can't even see those wounds, after a few months and after the tag is off. But sometimes we'll get 3 to 4 weeks of data that way. Unfortunately, the blue whale can sometimes travel, hundreds or even thousands of miles in that period, and that can be a pretty tall order for recovery. And between trips I've had to do, James Fallbush, who's done a lot of these, and Jack Barkowski, 2 other people I work with, there have been some very, very long distance trips to hundreds of miles offshore trying to sometimes recover these tags when they go long distances. But then when we get that data back, it's incredibly valuable. We partnered for a lot of our tag analysis with the Goldbogen lab at Stanford. And these are some of the people at Stanford that have been really valuable. I'll be talking about a few of them. Jeremy Goldbogen actually, when he was getting his PhD at Scripps, worked with us analyzing tag data. And then he went on to do a postdoc with Cascadia, and now he's a professor at Stanford, and has his own lab. And our partnership with them has been extremely valuable. We've done a lot of studies involved with James, who now works with us full time. He's gotten his PhD. Dave Cade, who's doing work still at the lab. Hannah is a PhD student working with gray whales at the Goldbogen lab. And we're really excited that Jack Barkowski, who I didn't get onto this thing, was accepted and will be starting to do his work there. So we've just had a great partnership and run working with that lab. I mentioned the tags we deploy just in the last 3 years. You can see we've deployed 120 tags between humpback, blue, fin, and gray whales of different types that I won't go into detail. Those tags have given us lots of information. I mean, they've, one of the remarkable things, and this is from a publication we did back in 2019, getting some of this tag data out, was telling us what the whales were doing at night. And prior to that, most of our observations of whales, most of our short-term deployments of suction cup tags all gave us data of what the whales were doing during the daytime. But it turned out they were doing very different things at night. And that was really important to understand things like ship strike risk. And for example, right away, if you get a blue whale tag back and you see this kind of a pattern down here, this is how deep the whale is diving, and this is time along this axis. And right away, this is daytime, and this in the middle is nighttime. And here's daytime again. So you see this very clear pattern of the whales tending to dive and feed deep in the daytime, and then mostly spending time near the surface at night. And that let us plot these curves you see on right that I'm not going to belabor, but basically what they show is if you're looking at something like ship strike risk, a blue whale is twice as likely to be in that surface zone where it'd be vulnerable to ship strike at night than it is in the day. So that's its main period of vulnerability. And we also found how whales move because they're less likely to be feeding and they're more likely to go on these meandering paths. Like these tracks over here, the white ones are day, black are at night. You can see these whales are more likely to do these meandering tracks into deeper water, in this case, in the Santa Barbara Channel, that overlapped with the shipping lanes at night. Again, right during that period where they're most vulnerable. And right away, that taught us that, okay, trying to think about sighting whales to be able to avoid a ship sighting a whale to avoid striking it. Well, that's not going to work using visual sightings. You're going to have to find methods that identify them at night because that's the main risk. So those are kind of examples of the findings that we tended to have. Let's see, I'm going to go just a little faster since I see I'm looks like about a little over a half hour into my talk. So let me just jump a few other things just to point out that, these tags give us this great data on how the whales are feeding at depth. So you get lots of insight into their biology, and that's important and valuable. They give us that daytime, nighttime difference. They give us that movement picture. If we combine it with measuring prey density, like you see here, we can look at how the whales are interacting and feeding in the prey layer and against the bottom. So here you see the contour of the bottom. You see a prey layer identified and where the whale was feeding and doing these lunges into the prey layer. So it's been really valuable for even integrating some of those things. One of the exciting new things, I'm not going to show you much about it because we did publish one paper on this already, but we're excited at some of the new developments that are coming, which is to start measuring heart rate of whales with some of these tags. And Ashley here, who you see here working at the Gold Bogan Lab, has been trying to improve the reliability of our ability to measure heart rates from some of these tag deployments. In the short term, it's involved adding these, sensors, electrodes that can measure heart rate to the suction cups on some of these tags and try to get them placed in the right place. And now we're experimenting with ways to try to get that more reliable. We've gotten some, interesting initial data, but it's been real hit or miss whether you get a good heart rate signal or not. And she's working to try to improve that. Another development we've been working on are better ways to deploy tags. We've mostly, we've been quite happy with our kind of boat approaches of how we approach whales to deploy tags. Oh, and maybe, am I gonna, let's see. Okay, I didn't. I thought I might have had a different slide in here. But the new way working with Ocean Alliance, we've been deploying at least the suction cup tags is, to drop the drones. This is footage from the first deployment we did on a gray whale working with Ocean Alliance and dropping a tag on. And that's proved useful because it's let us be much more targeted in what animals we deploy these tags on. It's allowed us with gray whales to deploy tags on all of the individuals in a group of 3, for example, so that we compare the behavior of all 3 and even monitor some of the call productions by whales in that group and how that's detected, not only by the tag that's on the calling whale, but the whales that are next to it. So that's been an exciting development. This is a video we took a number of years ago just to give you a sense of what some of the video that comes off this tag shows. So this is a group of humpback whales feeding on anchovies in Monterey Bay.
Got a whale just ahead of me, John, to my left.
And that's James there that you hear bow. And this is from a GoPro I'm wearing, and this is the GoPro he's wearing as we approach this group of humpback whales feeding with seabirds and sea lions. And we're kind of trying to stay a little bit back and get one of the trailing animals, which is about to come up here as we get ready so we don't get in the middle of them. That's the tag going on right there. And now we're going to switch to the video footage from the tag. And you'll see 2 images. On the right, you see the image of the camera facing backwards. So here you see the dorsal fin and the fluke of the whale that we just tagged. And this is looking forward towards the head. And now you're starting to get a picture of how the whale's swimming. You see other whales, and you'll see how this whale maneuvers. In this case here, we see this whale right now not beating its flukes, but here's a big school of anchovies. So right here, it starts to accelerate, beat its flukes that you see, and accelerate into that ball of anchovies to feed and break up that school. And you'll see some of the sea lions and birds actually picking off some of the anchovies that are broken up as the whale does this. In this case, this whale actually makes contact with another whale that's also trying to feed. But there you can see the seabirds picking off some of the anchovies broken up by the whale's lunge feeding. And it showed this remarkable kind of interplay, if you will, not just among the humpback whales, but between the humpback whales, the sea lions, and some of the seabirds. In this case, this whale is now making a sharp turn to the right, and it's now accelerating to come back into the school of anchovies. So this was really instructive. We were only able to get a few hours of video to record on these tags just because it uses up so much space. We're able to get a lot longer data streams, but the video that we get even from those few hours, and what you're seeing here is the unedited first 2 minutes of this deployment. And so we were kind of blown away by this. And again, seeing how the whales have to maneuver around each other. There's some vocalizations that occur there. Okay, I'm going to stop that there and not go on, but we were really pleased with what we were able to get from these tags and the insights they provided to what these whales were doing underwater. Another major use, and we've done this now in a half dozen studies, and I'm going to highlight our most recent study that we did last year, is to use these tags as a really sensitive way to measure the behavioral response of these whales to different human threats and underwater sounds. And in the 2010s, we started to do this to study how these whales responded to and were impacted by mid-frequency Navy sonar. Just last year, we did our largest study trying to examine how these whales responded to a new sound source called marine vibraces that is proposed as an alternative to seismic air guns. Seismic air guns produce a very impulsive, loud sound, either to measure earthquake faults or in oil exploration. They're extensively used in areas like Gulf of Mexico. And this new technology is a hoped-for technique that would be much less impactful to whales and marine mammals. But we wanted to do an empirical test to verify that was actually true. And this was a large study done with Southall Environmental Associates and several other groups. It was supported by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the EMP Sound and Marine Life Program. And we did this study, a couple of pilot efforts of this in 2022 and 23. And then 24, we did our first experiment with that actual sound source and playback. And we deployed a large number of suction cup tags and some of these medium duration dart attached tags on blue whales in the Southern California Bight. So this went through a number of years. It was affected by the pandemic in the early 2020s. It involved use of this in 24, finally using this larger sound source that was one element of this marine vibrissae sound source. We worked with the Channel Islands Sanctuary and worked from their vessel Shearwater. And we conducted a combination of, visual observations, drone-based observations, acoustic monitoring of the whales. But our most powerful tool was these tags that we would then have on the whale and be able to see its natural behavior and if it altered anything it was doing when this sound source was played. And we ended up deploying tags in the Santa Barbara Channel, and elsewhere in the Southern California Bight. This is actually showing the tracks of some of those whales from 2024, just last year, and where we conducted some of those experiments, either playbacks or some of these, say, controls. And that means we had the vessels, we positioned everything the same, we had the tagged whale, but we did not make any sound. So we had a comparison to see and make sure that if there was any response by the whale, it wasn't just to the presence of the boats as opposed to the sound source. And we were actually quite impressed. We were in the process of analyzing this data, but the initial returns from this data did not suggest any response by the whales. They continued to feed, and we may find some subtler responses, but it was encouraging for this technology. Okay, I'll just point out that, with most of these whales that we did this, we were able to, measure the sounds that they were hearing. We were able to get drone photographs to measure the whales and look at their condition. And so, on some cases, we were also able to get some heart rate data. We were able to get call data on the whales and get all of that in the context of some of these playbacks. And I'm just showing a few whales. Now, we expected some, as a friend of mine used to say, in an operation of this size, you might expect a few losses. We thought we were going to not recover one of our tags on a blue whale that ended up swimming down south off Baja, and then we stopped hearing from the tag at all. But even that tag, which something went wrong with the satellite transmitter and the VHF transmitter, ended up washing up on a beach and recovered, and actually ended up being brought back to San Diego by someone who was walking the beaches. And we were actually able to connect with them and get that tag back almost 4 months after the fact. We were able to get data on some species like fin whales. This is actually the movements of a fin whale, right off Santa Monica Bay over to Anacapa Island that spent several weeks feeding in that area. Okay. So now changing gears once again, and let's see, we got 7:50. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about gray whales. And again, I may end up cutting a little bit of this short just because I do want to stop by, I'll make sure to stop by, say, 8:10, so I don't talk for more than an hour, so there's time for some questions. Gray whales, I think most people are familiar with, make these long migrations along the US West Coast from their primary feeding areas up in the Arctic to their primary breeding grounds in Baja, Mexico. But there are many interesting subtleties about gray whales, and we've been particularly interested in studying them, especially up in the Pacific Northwest. And we've kind of come to categorize, you have the overall Eastern North Pacific group of gray whales that make that familiar migration. We have a group of whales that come and feed in Puget Sound, the same whales returning and feeding every year in spring, and then continue their migration to the Arctic. And we've come to name those whales the sounders. We have another group called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group, or PCFG. These are whales that don't appear to largely make that migration north and feed from spring through fall in Pacific Northwest waters. And then finally, I would want to mention there is what was considered to be a separate population of Western gray whales that primarily feed in the Sea of Okhotsk region and off Kamchatka and Sakhalin Island. And it was thought to be a completely distinct population. But some recent tagging studies, well, recent, not so recent now, ended up revealing that many of those whales that were feeding off Sakhalin that were satellite tagged ended up migrating to Baja. It was hoped for those tags were going to reveal their breeding locations in the Western North Pacific, potentially off China. But instead, it revealed that many of those whales instead come to the Eastern North Pacific to breed. And that's left a little bit of uncertainty about the ultimate status of those Western gray whales that were thought to have existed. Now, with gray whales, we've seen some dramatic changes in populations and mortality events. And this was best encapsulated by this paper that came out in late 2023 by Josh Stewart on boom-bust cycles of gray whales and trying to link many of the data sources together to better understand why we're seeing these dramatic changes in gray whale mortalities and abundance. The gray whales in the last 6 years have been subjected to an unusual mortality event that went from 2019 through 2023. And then based on some positive indications in 2023, that unusual mortality event was thought to be over. But as Elisa alluded to, and from some of her monitoring and some of the initial data in 2025, it looks like we're not out of the woods at all with gray whales. And gray whales have gone through unusual mortality events in the past from which they bounced back. But this time, after that unusual mortality event that started in 2019, it's extending longer. And now, instead of seeing this big recovery, we're seeing continued, very concerning both numbers, body condition of animals, calves being born at very low numbers. So I think it's suggesting a much bigger, more fundamental issue occurring than what we were even aware of when we worked on that paper that I was talking to that Josh Stewart led. During that unusual mortality event, hundreds of gray whales were documented dead all along their range from Alaska down through Baja. And again, this is taken from the NOAA Unusual Mortality website. The data comes from Canada, the US, and Mexico. And most of the mortalities kind of occurring in the springtime period, spring to early summer, which is when you'd expect gray whales to be most susceptible to nutritional stress. Let's see, I'm going to skip over this. I'm going to just jump to a couple of key points. In Washington State, we've had a very long-term record of documenting gray whale strandings and mortality. And Jesse Huggins is our stranding coordinator, has been doing that for well over 10 years. We've got a remarkable record of gray whale strandings. And here's this number of strandings per year. And you clearly see this huge number, record year in 2019, that triggered that most recent unusual mortality event. And then you see the numbers, even in Washington, have remained elevated, well above our average numbers from the past. But I also want to look backwards and show you that there was an unusual mortality event that occurred in 1999 and 2000. That's one of the ones the gray whales bounced back from. And even before such things as unusual mortality events were being declared, another previous period we saw elevated numbers of strandings in Washington State was 1990-91. And now those three time periods, 1990-91, 1999-2000, and then 2019 on, are going to come up in some of the next slides. So I kind of circle them to highlight that because they end up connecting with a number of different things. For one thing, if you look at the abundance estimates from the censuses of Eastern North Pacific gray whales, you actually see 3 periods of major declines in the abundance estimates. And in my very crude way here, I've actually superimposed that stranding slide over the top of these estimates of humpback whale abundance, synchronizing the years. And you'll actually see those period of elevated mortality we documented in 1989-90, in 1999, 2000, and then starting in 2019, exactly coincide with these major declines in the estimates of the gray whale population. Now, many of these gray whales that die are really emaciated, suggesting kind of nutritional stress is a major source behind this. But also some of these mortalities cause gray whales to behave in unusual ways and spend more time in places where they're more susceptible to entanglement and vessel strikes. So we see an interesting interaction with even some of the human causes of death. Okay, I'm going to jump on now to that PCFG gray whale population that I mentioned. One of the interesting things about that, these are these gray whales that instead of going to the Arctic to feed in the Pacific Northwest. And what you'll notice is that during the period of the unusual mortality event here in 1999, 2000, the number of these gray whales was increasing. And similarly, in 2019, you don't see this big decline. So to me, that's showing a couple of things, that these gray whales that are feeding further south are actually keeping a rather stable population. And it really points to the food source in the Arctic as being the source of that unusual mortality event. Okay, I'm going to skip that. One of the reasons the PCFG gray whales have become of added significance and interest is because the macaw have proposed to resume their historical hunt of gray whales. And in 1999, they did take a gray whale under that. And since then, it's largely been mired in kind of legal challenges. But I think we're likely to see as soon as this year, resumption of that macaw whale hunt. And that has added significance just because that hunt would occur in Washington. So that's in the range of these PCFG gray whales. And so it makes it important whether the gray whales they take are part of that overall Eastern North Pacific gray whale population that numbers in the tens of thousands, or that Pacific Coast feeding group that numbers in the hundreds. And in some ways, both of those, as I pointed out, are facing different pressures. Fortunately, in the management plan that the macaw have and that NOAA have, they are incorporating consideration for that PCFG subunit of gray whales. Okay, now I'm going to jump again to talk about those Sounders gray whales. And they're a group we've been doing a lot of work with because they present this unique opportunity for us to study gray whales. These are gray whales that come into Puget Sound and feed. I'll show you it's the same gray whales returning every year. They feed primarily in incredibly shallow water where there's barely enough water for them to swim, and they're actually feeding in the intertidal zone. So in this case, where these gray whales are feeding right here at low tide, that area is exposed, and all of these dimples you see in this aerial photograph are feeding pits made by a gray whale. These are pits that are, on the order of 10 feet long, and 4 or 5 feet wide, where a gray whale is basically excavated by sucking this soft sediment and the prey that exists in it and feeding on it. And obviously, they can only do that at high tide, and they're also extremely vulnerable to being beached if they get the tide cycle wrong. Sometimes they're feeding, up to a mile away from safe deep water. So they really need to know their tides. These whales are making quite a migration. Here you see Washington State. This in yellow is the overall migration route of gray whales. And these Sounders gray whales have learned to take this deviation, come through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, come through this narrow gap of Admiralty Inlet, come around Whidbey Island, and then this is their Sounders feeding area here. And it's remarkable that these whales find this area. The same whales zero in on it. Once they discovered this prey resource, even though they could only access it at high tide, it was rich enough that they came back year after year. And this is the main slide we use to kind of demonstrate that. These are different individual gray whales, some with names. Many of them we have the sex from. And then this goes back to 1990 when we first documented these gray whales. And where you see it being shaded, that means this same gray whale was seen every one of these years coming back. So very much the same gray whales coming back to feed. But you'll notice a couple of things. The initial group of gray whales, well, they started in 1990 and 91. The next group of gray whales joined in 1999, 2000, and a new group of gray whales joined starting around 2019. And if you remember those 3 dates, those are the periods of those nutritional stress, unusual mortality events. So if we ask the question, what would motivate gray whales, to leave their migration route, seek out and find a high-risk new feeding strategy? Well, I think this points to the reason being desperation. These were years that these whales were facing a major challenge. The population was facing declines due to these nutritional stress, and these were whales seeking an alternative. And you can also see that some of these whales that discovered this food resource, they've done a remarkable job of surviving these unusual mortality events. We're just starting to get a few of these whales dying in recent years that we've been seeing for over 30 years. So it was a successful strategy. And now we have increasing number of gray whales doing it. A parallel study by John Durbin and Holly Fernbaugh has been looking at how these whales gain body condition during the time period they're here. And it's rather remarkable. This is the same gray whale in February and April of the same year. And you can see how dramatically it can gain body condition, even with this part-time feeding strategy. Some of the tags have helped reveal, and I'm going to freeze this, some of the details of how they're feeding and feeding in the shallow water. When they do go down and feed, you can see this is a gray whale diving, and right away it's at the bottom because it's only diving about 8 feet. And here it is contacting the soft bottom. These little pits show the location of ghost shrimps. And it goes down, and then it will start suction feeding there to start ingesting those ghost shrimp. And this is part of what Hannah Clayton, one of the graduate students, is focusing on studying. And now you can start to see this kind of mud plume streaming by as this gray whale suction feeds, including a little ghost shrimp that went by there. Okay. That takes me to my final slide. And I just wanted to make a couple of closing points and then take some questions. Again, I kind of view what we've tried to do here at Cascadia is, take some of the data sets like the photo ID data set and keep it going now for, going on 40 years of monitoring humpback and blue whales with these long-term photo ID data sets. And part of the way that's possible, I want to point out, we've got a lot of really valuable contributors in the Southern California Bight Aquarium of the Pacific, working with Harbor Breeze Cruises, has been an amazing participant gathering data and sending in photo IDs from their surveys. The Channel Islands Naturalist Corps going out on island packers and the Condor Express gathering data. And now a number of other whale watch operations in the Southern California Bight have been contributing photo IDs, to us. Elisa with the gray whale monitoring program has been really helpful in reporting sightings to us and getting IDs from some of her work. So those have been really valuable for us. And things like Happy Whale have really helped make that even more of a productive way for people to submit humpback whale IDs. I kind of want to jump to this last point, which is, while there are lots of encouraging things like humpback whale recovery and improvements in reducing things like entanglements and new initiatives to address some of those, we are facing, a dramatic new challenge that really scares me. First and foremost, the threat to the very existence of, agencies like NOAA and the Marine Mammal Commission, probably the two most important federal agencies that are responsible for marine mammal research and management and protection, have seen threats to their existence, dramatic reductions in their staff, and certainly their ability to support continued research. Cascadia, we probably get the vast majority of our support over the last, 45 years that we've existed has come from NOAA. And a lot of people don't realize, for example, the multiple roles NOAA plays. I mean, it's responsible for the Marine Mammal Protection Act for most of the marine mammal species and ESA, Endangered Species Act enforcement. Management of human impacts is conducted through NOAA. The Marine Sanctuary Program, that's part of NOAA. Permitting, whether it's incidental takes or research permits like we do, that's all handled by NOAA. All of these things, are threatened. And, even though my tenure at Cascadia has gone through, the Reagan administration, cutbacks in federal funding, I don't think I've seen, as an across the board threat, both to marine mammal management, marine mammal research, and for us here at Cascadia, probably our ability to survive. So we're looking at strategies for, how to survive this period, but I really urge people to whatever degree, your conscience moves you to both look at how we can protect these agencies that are involved. The problem with us on the West Coast, most of our congressional representatives along the coast, are, supporters of these things, but to whatever degree you can reach out and reach out to other people, it's important to realize the major threat that we're facing on that. We do take donations at Cascadia, that especially you can dedicate, support for either our West Coast research or the entanglement related program, the Partnership for West Coast Whale Entanglement, or a major program at Cascadia here headed by Robin Baird is our Hawaii Odontocetes program that's done pioneer work with species like false killer whales and recognizing, their occurrence in the Hawaiian Islands and the threats they face there. You can dedicate support to those things.